Every time I tried to pare this list down, it just got longer.
Oh, somebody stop me!
Today we are ranking too many black metal albums from 2023, and we're starting with Thantifaxath with Hive Narcosis. This is avant-garde black metal that provokes both the terror and uncanniness of nightmares, blizzards of imperial triumphant-esque tremolos, hellish descents into Deathspell Omega and Bluthaus Nord, and technical and progressive displays of enslaved meets Krallis. Really, this entire album is just a soul-sucking vacuum of nothingness and despair, and for that reason, it is going to perfection. Next up is Ekrom with a title that I'm not even going to try to pronounce, but you can find it in the description. Solid Norwegian black metal with both great riffs and great synth atmosphere, kind of a mix of Emperor with the more Swedish sound of Dissection. Very much written with a certain reverence for the purity of the black metal of the early 90s, but with some more modern flourishes in the production. I can't put it too high considering it's more formulaic in its qualities, but the formula is executed to a pretty powerful degree here, so I'm putting it at great tier. Then we have Runespell with Shores of Nastrond. More echoey, cavernous production mixed with the big triumphant and kind of folky riffs. I like this sound, but I do feel like it's becoming kind of overused, and as a result, I can't help but compare it to other bands I think are doing it better. It just feels like a slightly less interesting combination of UADA or Magua and Moon Sorrow, and maybe a little Wolves in the Throne Room too. It's very chill, and I enjoy it as background music, but personally I find it a little dull actually to focus in on, so yeah, I think atmospheric fans may rank this higher, but for me it just went to meh. Speaking of which, we have UADA with Crepuscule Natura. I've always enjoyed these fellow Portlanders ever since I first caught them live around like 2014, 2015, but over the last few years I feel like they had strayed from what made them such a entrancing thing in my listening purview. This one though feels like a return to their roots, and I think it actually may be their best since the debut. I think they really deliver on a brand of atmospheric black metal that brings the hooks while conjuring imagery of lush Pacific Northwestern forests, so I'm putting this one at fantastic. Next up is Victory Over the Sun with Dance You Monster to My Soft Song. This project also comes to us from Portland, Oregon, and it fittingly is on a more hipster black metal side of the spectrum. I'd say it's a bit darker and more overtly black metal than Liturgy, which we'll get to, but they feel cut from a similar cloth with the implementation of jazzy brass instruments and bright twinkling indie-inspired guitars, but for every moment like that, there's a stark counterpart, like the hideous industrialized misery of Wheel. It was interesting, but I didn't find myself just really getting into it, so I put it at okay. Then we have Hellripper with Warlocks Grim and Withered Hags. Black and thrash continues to be my favorite style of thrash, and Hellripper are out here once again showing how it's done with the perfect balance of both sides. Tracks like I the Deceiver, The Hissing Marches, and Goat Vomit Nightmare are pure unadulterated headbang frenzies of punky D-beats, Motorhead hooks, Maiden-esque harmonies, and rumbling bass grooves that never fail to put a smile on my face. One of my most re-listened albums of the year period, and also topping my 2023 thrash metal list. This is going to perfection. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, be sure to hit the like button, comment your own favorite albums on this list, and also add things that I have not included, because this is not exhaustive. There were a lot of albums that came out this year, so by all means, share. But next up, we have And Oceans with As in Gardens, So in Tombs. So this album is good, but the people were raving about it to such a degree that I started to feel like it was kind of overrated. It's a solid listen for fans of things like Emperor, and I really like the synths and occasional folky sections, but ultimately it just seems a little bit generic and ultimately forgettable in my opinion. The very one-note vocals especially can get a little bit grating for me. I even circled back months after release to see if my feelings would change, but they haven't, so Fight me, it's my list, it's going to good tier. Then we have Esoctrilihum with Astraal Constellations of the Majickal, Zodiac, and Funeral. This is a band I simultaneously deeply respect but always feel overwhelmed by. In addition to each album being a dense and lengthy affair in itself, this guy is prolific as hell, with 10 albums already put out in the past 6 years. Astraal is a spooky good time that makes me feel like I'm traveling deeper and deeper into an endless catacombs. In some ways, the atmosphere actually reminds me of Enslaved's Frost, except perhaps a little bit more grandiose with the use of organ. It definitely does not need to be a daunting 2 hours and 10 minutes, though, but it is working out at least once, I would say. This one ended up at okay tier for me. And then Funeral, yes, he put out 2 albums this year. Living up to its name, has a more doomy vibe to it. It also really leans into the atmosphere with an emphasis on synths and heavy reverb in the production. Honestly, despite the shorter but still over an hour runtime, I found this one to be much more boring and repetitive, far from their best or most exciting albums. Again, still worth a listen, but yeah, this one went to meh. Then we have Porta Nigra with Weltende. This is the 4th full-length album from this German band, and it's a particularly decadent and ravenous sounding one. Beyond the expected aggression, there's just this constant air of filth and malevolence, and it's very warlike too, with the chugging guitars, drums, and particular enunciation of the vocals sounding like a battlefield on tracks like Volka Brand. But then there are also spooky synths and chanted vocals more on par with like Shamash, and the bass-heavy title track reminds me of Aeneon. Great dynamic range and pacing overall to make what feels like a constantly unfolding experience. This one landed at fantastic. Then we have Sonafe with Nous sommes der. This French black metal solo act bringing a particularly infectious brand of jangly, folky guitars and D-beats to tell medieval tales of dark times, not to mention a guest spot from Bludas Nord's Vinsval, another one that's maybe a little long-winded at times with some tracks running close to 10 minutes, but this one does a better job of keeping things interesting, and the shifting songwriting, acoustic sections, and implementation of choral backing vocals always make for an interesting listen. I put it at good tier. Then we have Panopticon with the Rime of Memory. Now, I feel like there's pretty much no question where this would land the minute it was announced, but I always hold my praise until I know for sure. But thankfully, this is another career high for Austin's incredible project, fusing the perfect combination of soaring guitars and relentless blast beats with acoustic strings, flutes, and even church bells. This quickly ended up in my top 3 of their entire discography and is easily near the very top of this list. Very emotional stuff, too. It is going to perfection. Then we have Fen with Monuments of Absence. This year was really packed when it came to these more atmospheric bands. I can't believe this is their 7th album since their first in 2009, and while it didn't really catch my ear back in July, it's definitely grown on me. The reality is that their experience shows when it comes to the songwriting, especially. They take the usual basic blueprint for the genre and really expand it and layer it to the max. Always nice to get a solid performance on the bass, too. Very introspective and often haunting stuff. And yeah, love the variety of textures and moods. It is going to fantastic. Next up is Marduk with Memento Mori. I was pretty impressed with the lead single, Blood of the Funeral, but the rest of this is kind of a mixed bag. I was less impressed with the title track, feeling a bit generic compositionally, and Heart of the Funeral is also pretty uninspired, but things do get more interesting with Shovel Beat Scepter, and then you've got the miserable sounding melodies of Charlatan and punky shifting rhythms of Marching Bones. Overall, it's a solid enough Marduk album, and an improvement over the last one, for sure, but not particularly remarkable. On this list, I'm going to put it at good tier. Then there's Toke with Et Hav of Avstand. Since 1999, it's as if Hoest has been able to weave the actual dirt, snow, and pine needles of the Norwegian forest into every note of his guitar melodies. And with this album, which is Norwegian for an ocean of distance, I think he continues to maintain that perfect 90s balance of raw and reverence. This feels like a real return to form, even capturing the same black magic that entranced me the first time I heard classics like Nådigst and Norg's Vapen. There could be a little bit more going on here, so I'm put it at great tier. Then there's Dodheimsgard with Black Medium Current. This is the 6th studio album from this Norwegian avant-garde black metal band, and another one I found myself in the minority opinion about when it came out. There are certainly some deeply profound moments with epic crescendos of emotion, but the somewhat bloated 1 hour and 9 minute runtime mostly leaves me feeling kind of cold, bored, and sometimes even annoyed with the wavering vocals.
Oh, that sounds like more of a personal issue.
Normally, this more experimental side is made for me with bands like Imperial Triumphant, Aeneon, Psy, and Thy Catafalque topping my favorite lists, but this just feels clunky and unfocused to me. Again, it's all opinions, but I thought it was just okay. Then there's Wolves in the Throne Room with Crypt of Ancestral Knowledge. This 4-song EP feels as if it's pulling a bit more from their roots, but still with the dynamic songwriting and also massive production that again brings to mind things like Moonsorrow. Personally, I'm partial to when the band pulls out their traditional instruments, and it's interesting how they join that with a more industrial sensibility on Initiates of the White Heart. Really solid, but something I'm not particularly blown away by, so this also landed at good tier. Then there's Wayfarer with American Gothic. Denver has some of the most quality US metal acts per capita, and this black metal crew is just one of their many great exports. Channeling sounds of the old American West, this album is equal parts Spurs, Chaps, and Corpse Paint. Never before has a slide guitar sounded quite so grim. Pair this with Blackbraid and Panopticon, and you've got the perfect USBM triple feature this year, and it is going to perfection. Then there's Lamp of Murmur with Saturnian Bloodstorm. Another popular release amongst my audience in March, Solid Atmosphere. I've always felt that for a project based out of LA, they somehow still managed to perfectly capture that icy Scandinavian sound of albums like At the Heart of Winter. In fact, I think a lot of the riffing here is at least somewhat comparable to that one. Good mix of thrashy strumming and more melodic leads. I also like the spooky synths in the second half of Hymns of Death. Solid stuff, if fairly typical. It is going to great tier. And speaking of Thy Catafalque, we have Thy Catafalque with Alfold. One of the most highly regarded projects in avant-garde black metal, once more not disappointing, even with Thomas describing this as their most straightforward album. I'd say it's loaded with unpredictable, throbbing brass, jazz flute, chaotic wailing solos, plodding progressive riffs, and cathartic female singing, alongside some folky acoustic guitars. Definitely in my top 10 for the genre this year. It is going to the top of fantastic. Then we have Voldgeflüster with Unter Bronzenen Kronen. This is a 4-song mini-album from the German Black Gaze project formed in 2005, and contrary to a lot of the dark doom and gloom of the other albums on this list, this record has a lush and hopeful sound that perfectly aligns with its nature-revering artwork. Beautiful stuff that takes the foundations of classic albums like Ulver's Bergtat and really fleshes it out into something a little bit more modern in its sentiment. I love me some evil and ugly black metal, but it's nice to have a counterpart to really emphasize the genre's versatility. Maybe just a touch repetitive though, so it is going to great tier. Then there's Thulkandra with Hail the Abyss. Thulkandra is the blackened project of Obscura's own multi-talented Stefan Kummerer, and this being their 5th album to date. Lots of clear connections here to the Swedish sound of both mellow death legends like In Flames and At the Gates, as well as melodic black metal sounds of bands like Sacramentum and Dissection, with the record even produced by Dan Swano. The end result is very much in line with those albums in terms of quality, but it always leaves me feeling like it lacks its own distinct personality. So for that reason, it wound up kind of around the middle at good. Then there's Thrawn with Dust. I had quite a few people in the comments of my Best of March video recommending this and calling it one of the best black metal albums of the year, but personally, I still think it sounds pretty standard to me. Like, it's good, and I dig the aggression, but a lot of this also feels very derivative of a million other albums I've heard over the years. I do enjoy the more tribulation vibe of The True Belief, Into Oblivion, The Wrong God, and The Eve. I'd like to hear more of that side of their sound, much more textured and dynamic compositions here and there that actually stand out, but as a whole, it just landed at meh. Then there's Dawn Raid with To Know the Light. Sad to see this British black metal band hang it up, as they had a pretty unique sound that kept me coming back over the past few years. Great implementation of mournful strings and this almost uncanny timeless atmosphere. The album's kind of a combination of the folky elements of some of the more performative aspects that remind me of fellow UK band A Forest of Stars. It's not my favorite album from them or on this list, but it's a solid swan song and fits pretty well somewhere, again, around the middle, upper middle, so I put it at great tier. Then there is Vuldrun with Throne of the Lunar Soul. This Ohio-based melodic black metal band combines elements of Dissection and Sacramentum with the more modern sensibilities of, again, bands like Tribulation, making for 74 minutes of truly engrossing perfection. Like, if you're complaining about how I'm complaining about some of the longer albums on this list, this is an example of how to do it correctly. Instead of just doing needless repetition of the same thing over and over again, they actually justify the run times and the investment. They give you more bang for your buck, basically. I think this album really keeps you on your toes and never leaves you checking your watch. It's never boring. Love it. It is maybe my favorite on this entire list at perfection. Then we have Varathron with the Crimson Temple. This Greek black metal band has been around since the 90s, but generally lingering in the shadow of the much more well-known Rotting Christ, both bands incorporating a similar melodic approach to the genre that the region has become known for. This album's very adeptly bringing some of that classic 90s energy, and one that fully captures a stellar union of infectious groovy guitar lines and folky atmospheric keys. It landed at fantastic. Then we have Azagram with Veil of Death Ruptured. Azagram is an all-female black metal band formed in 2015 and currently based in the Netherlands. I've been following them since their first full length in 2017. I've always felt like they do good work, but haven't released a record I loved from start to finish. This is their 3rd album, and I can hear them continue to mature both in their more aggressive moments, as with the opening track, as well as their more melancholic ones. They do a good job of balancing the dark and melodic, with the production having enough of an edge to give it kind of a classic 90s energy. On this list, though, it was just about okay. Enjoyable. Even the lower stuff on this list, again, worth listening to. Then there is Mephoresh with Crystal Ah. This was one of my final big anticipated albums of 2023. I loved 1557 in 2015. That album is just like a spiraling portal with the sense that you're constantly slipping deeper into oblivion, and Shem Ha Mephoresh was a solid follow-up. Unfortunately, I found myself pretty disappointed with this one. It just doesn't have that same sense of scope or evil to it, and most of the time I'm honestly kind of bored with its more doom-oriented aesthetic. I appreciate what it's doing, but it's just not for me. So it landed at meh. Then we have Nightcrowned with Tales. Excellent Dissectionist, melodic black metal featuring members of Dark Funeral, Night Rage, and Cypher System. This is their third record, very much continuing the evolution of their sound. I especially love the wonderfully folky overtones of tracks like She Comes at Night. And as always, they bring those menacing earworm hooks. It is going to great. Then there's Liturgy with 93616.
This one.
That's art.
Yes,
That's art.
Liturgy has always been a project that I deeply respect but rarely enjoy. I love the constant pushing of boundaries here, really leaning into the strings and choral elements for an album that feels like a demented orchestral performance more than anything else, from the glitchy electronics to wind and brass instruments to strings and xylophone. That said, I find it all to be very shrill and disjointed, definitely worth experiencing at least once, but I rarely have an interest in going back to this one. It is going to okay. Then there's Caligram with Position Momentum. I've been following this band for a bit now since 2016's Demimonde, but these days I'd put their atmospheric approach alongside the likes of Garea or maybe Numenorian. They still have some D-beat moments here and there, as with my personal favorite Astraal. It's also a very dynamic record, often finding stretches of minimalist doom complemented by mournful wails of trumpet. Big recommend for post-Black fans. It is going to good tier. Then we have Blackbraid with Blackbraid II. This Native American project really knocked it out of the park with their full-length debut, with a stunning display of melodic black metal deeply infused with a sense of emotionally stirring reverence. Take elements of UADA and Panopticon, but then add an entirely new regional and historical context behind it. Tracks like The Spirit Returns and The Wolf That Guides the Hunter's Hand are real tearjerkers. The guitars alone have such power behind them that never fails to linger in my brain. Looking forward to hearing more from them. It is going to pretty high up on fantastic. Then we have Botanist with 8 Selenotrope. The return of one of the most unique projects in black metal with the haunting hammered dulcimer-driven melodies of Botanist. In many ways, I'd argue that this project's approach feels even more grounded in reverence of nature and the feel of the forest than any band that has come before, like sunlight glimmering through the trees. I will say I continue to be a bit underwhelmed by the use of clean and whisper vocals, which can work in small doses, but shows some cracks when utilized more extensively. Definitely one of the more original albums on this list, but not necessarily one of the more fun ones, so it landed at okay. They have better albums, so if you don't enjoy that one, check out some of their earlier stuff. Then we have Immortal with War Against All. It definitely shows that this is basically the Demon Ass show at this point. Like, really, on the positive side, I dig the icy riffs of the title track and Thunders of Darkness, and both No Sun and Return to Cold have a kind of hypnotic effect. But then I get a little bit bored by the more plotting tracks like War God, Blashirk, My Throne, and especially Nordlandir. It's definitely missing something that worked for Northern Chaos Gods. It's maybe my least favorite in their entire discography now, so it is going to meh. Then we have Blut aus Nord with Disharmonium Nahab. The French experimental black metal giants have completed their latest 2-part Lovecraftian opus. It's something I enjoyed, but I have to say that I still prefer part 1 overall, and by comparison it just feels more like an afterthought. It's much more kind of like ambient and droney. I haven't found myself that interested in going back to it either. Enjoyable, not terrible, it's going to good. Then we have Kostnat Yeni with Upal. Much like Imperial Triumphant or Deathspell Omega, Kostnat Yeni perfectly mold elements of dissonance and avant-garde into something strangely palatable, as if the album is a wild horse that has a primary songwriter and musician is attempting to tame. Technical guitars meld with meditative atmosphere, African folk, and elements of noise rock to craft something that is just so far beyond the endless parade of paint-by-numbers, Darkthrone, and Dissection clones. It was even higher up before, but it kind of got bumped down by some of these. It's going to great. And then we have Enslaved with Heimdall. Now, in my book, Enslaved are one of the greatest bands of all time with one of the strongest discographies out there, with this feeling like a more cohesive album than Utgard while still showcasing their usual experimentation. Behind the Mirror feels reminiscent of thoughts like Hammers, while Congelia calls back to their icier black metal roots. Forest Dweller has a lush sense of scope and wonder, but my favorite continues to be Caravans to the Outer Worlds. Start to finish, every track here has something special to offer, from the surprising synth work to the more obvious flourishes of 70s prog, and yeah, of course this one is also going to perfection. Y'all check out this playlist for more black metal videos, or this one for more videos ranking 2023 albums by genre. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.